Hey guys, so of course I am not with you this week, but I am here with you in spirit. So we're going to be going over large-scale seafaring expeditions, which is perfect because I'm currently on a boat enjoying my time, unlike you. Now, let's take a look at why people explored. Now, it all started way back when people first realized that if you put a really hollowed out piece of wood into the water and you sit in it, you can float. But who was the first to really go large sea-scale faring people? So what people were the first to really go great distances using boats, and not just kind of downstream or in a river, but crossing large bodies of water. And we can go all the way back to the Malay people in modern day Polynesia. So this is way out in the oceanic region, Australia. We can go to Southeast Asia near Singapore. You can go all the way to the Philippines and Indonesia. These people were the first to really start oceanic faring expeditions. Think Moana. So that movie does a pretty decent depiction of their large-scale, lightweight boats that they would use to cross the oceans and actually go from island to island. And they would do the thing where they put their hand out like this, and really that was a form of technology. What they were doing was ultimately using a star for one finger in their horizon with their thumb, and by measuring the angle to which the star is from the horizon, they knew which direction they were going. So it's actually really clever that they came up with this. And because they came up with this, they were able to get from place to place and thus spread humans to different parts of the world, thus discovering new types of natural resources. It wouldn't be long that other cultures and civilizations started practicing these similar techniques, and the Muslim explorers, in particular the Arab explorers in the Indian Ocean, did an amazing job. During this time, there was an explosion of technological and scientific advancement within the Arab cultures, mostly due to the spread of Islam. Now, we'll talk about that in a later chapter, like in the end of quarter two, but in reality, Islam had a really big impact on global seafaring, and that has down to how the culture would spread. Unlike other religions like Christianity and Judaism, Islam culture is like a culture wrapped all into one. Every culture shares a similar language, religion, government, political ideology, societal beliefs. So when Islam spread, that culture and language and technology spread. And one of the things that they were really developing well were ships that could actually go relatively decent distances. And also, they were spreading technology such as the magnetic compass and the astrolabe. So the astrolabe, if you remember what I said about Moana with the hand thing, is just more of an actual device that would do the same feature. And of course, we all know what a compass does. It kind of points true north. So these cultures really started dominating the early seafaring expeditions compared to the rest of the world. So they created a lockdown on what we would now know as the most common seafaring trade routes, which would be from the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. And they would control these markets for a long period of time with another group of people known as the Italians. We all know the Italians, right? Christopher Columbus, even though he sailed for Spain, but that's later in the story. But these two cultures, the Italians and the Muslims, would actually control the market on all these expeditions because they kind of controlled the seas. They had the technology to do so. The Venetians of Italy, as well as many of the Muslim and Arab traders of the time, controlled this, thus keeping Europe out of the way, essentially. They really didn't have a way to get involved. So what did Europe have to do? Well, they had to find a way to get to Asia to get all these luxury goods. Now, why did they even want these luxury goods? Well, that's another story that has to do with earlier parts of world history, but we can just nail it up in a lump sum. So we had a series of religious wars known as the Crusades, where Christians wanted to fight and take back the Holy Land of Jerusalem from the Arabs who were there in the time, with those who were Muslim, of course. And during their times in these wars, Europeans were introduced to some goods that they did not have back at home. Remember, most Englishmen would wear wool and itchy clothing. They got their hands on some silk, that sweet, luxurious silk that makes your skin feel so nice. They got a hold of it. And once you get it, you don't want to go back from it. So they also were introduced to ivory, porcelain, tea, all these wonderful things that they did not have back at home. And they wanted that stuff because it sold well. And the wealthy and the elites and the nobles of the time and most of Western Europe really wanted these goods. So they had to find a way to get to it without having to pay so much money to the Muslims and the Muslims and the Italians who controlled that original sea route. So a couple of people had to come up with some ideas first, but what really, what are the motivations? So other than we just talked about goods, but there's three typical motivations that we can come up with when we talk about why these people really wanted all to go to such distances, then sacrifice their lives in order to get it. And we call it the three G's: God, gold, and glory. These are the three G's. So when you think of God, of course, the spread of Christianity would be a big part of the Europeans' reason for advancing their technology. We saw that with Muslim traders before the Europeans got involved. They were successful in spreading Islam through trade, so that was a big factor. Gold, of course, money rules the world, and being able to go and find more access to natural resources, gold, silver, all sorts of those things, it made it really financially viable to get people to go and actually go and explore. And the last one is glory. And this is not one that we don't always think about very often, but it's kind of important. Because when we have the glory aspect, you didn't have a lot of middle class. You were either born rich or you were born poor. So there was really no upward mobility. So you really were going to go from being poor to being rich, no matter how hard you worked. But if you put your life on the line and found a trade route from one place to another, you could be successful. And that was something that was new back then. So many people wanted to put their name out there to become something famous. So the next hard part thing is, how is Europe going to even do this? So they're behind in the technology wave. The Black Death and the Black Plague made a real rough impact on their ability to go out and explore, because the technology and the lack of education and cultural diffusion was gone because they closed up ports, and Italy wanted nothing to do with the rest of Europe during the Black Plague. So how did they get there? Well, it takes place on the Iberian Peninsula. Now, you guys have probably been working on your assignments these last couple of days, and you spent a lot of time talking about the Iberian Peninsula. For the lack of a better word, the Iberian Peninsula is Spain and Portugal, right? Yes, there's other places like Andorra, and in your readings, you probably come to a realization that about the 1400s, Spain had finally unified with the conquering of the Moors, the Muslim group that lived in southeastern Spain, Cordoba. And so we would see that at this time, Spain and Portugal, those kingdoms were unifying and trying to come up with a way to be able to financially survive against these other major trade partners that were out there with Italy and the Islamic world at that, for that matter. So who's going to get this? Well, there was one guy in particular, and his name was Prince Henry the Navigator. Yes, that was his nickname, the Navigator. Now, he really wasn't much of an explorer. He never really got on boats all that often, but he realized that this would be, both literally and figuratively, the path to success. So he opened up a series of schools. They would get the finest craftsmen, cartographers. Those are people who make maps. They would get their hands on the best seafaring technology. They would build the best ships. The ships that would come out at this time were known as caravels. They were strong, seaworthy. They could sustain large amounts of pressure from the ocean, while at the same time being relatively shallow underneath so they can get close to the shoreline. So they would build these boats and they would teach these sailors how to sail, and their goal was to ultimately find a path to Europe, or from Europe, to really, they started with Africa and then they made their way to India. India would be the crown jewel. That would be the goal. Now, they had several attempts. The most notable was Vasco da Gama. He was the first to successfully sail from Portugal all the way down underneath the southern tip of Africa and back up again to India, which is an extraordinarily long journey. It took almost 9 months on the original path. So we know that it was now possible to avoid going through the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean that the Italian and Muslim merchants controlled, so they can actually get their hands on these Asian goods that they really wanted without having to pay the middleman. But people would want to push it a step further, and that's where Columbus steps in. So the Spanish had the case of the jelly bellies. They see what Portugal's doing, and they don't want to get left out. So what do? They essentially kind of try to do another state-sponsored run and say, hey, can we get to Asia a different way? And this Italian guy from Genoa was like, hey, I know a way. Now, several other countries had rejected Columbus on this and said, yeah, I'd rather not put my money into it. But one of the biggest misnomers that people have about this time is that nobody believed that the earth was round, that everybody thought it was flat. At this time, most educated people realized that the earth was round, but they didn't want to put their money on the fact, and they didn't want to risk a lot of money that would go into building these boats and ships and sending them on their way, only for them to just sink in the ocean and be gone. But King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel of Spain gave Columbus that opportunity. And in 1492, he sails west to make it to Asia again. And guess what he does? He makes it to India, right? Now, he didn't actually get to India. In fact, he missed the entire planet. He was about off by half a planet. It's like if I went for a high five and I touched the back of your heel. Kind of missed it on that one. But he would go back to India 4 more times. Where is he actually going? The Caribbean. He made it to the islands of Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and most of the Bahamas. And he was going around here and finding new abundant sources of resources and things of that nature. So why do we say he went to India? Well, that's because that's where he thought he was. He died thinking he made it to India. It wasn't until a man by the name of Amerigo Vespucci realized he found 2 entirely new continents. And so, of course, this is why we're now all called Columbia. We're called America after Amerigo Vespucci. But one other man also realized it was possible to go all the way around. His name was Ferdinand Magellan. Now, we give him credit for being the first man to circumnavigate the world. So that means to sail all the way around the earth. Except he died 2/3 of the way on the attempt, but his crew still made it, so we give him credit. So why is all this important? Well, this all leads us to the age of colonialization. So we're going to see that Spain and Portugal would dominate so much territory in this area that there would have to be a treaty made that would separate what would be Portuguese territory, which is what we now know as Brazil, and Spanish territory, which was to the west, which would be modern-day Mexico, Central America, and the western half of South America. And Spanish were very good at going and conquering, so much so that they called their explorers conquistadors. And who are the 2 most famous in this time? Well, that would be Hernan Cortez and Francisco Pizarro. Cortez would conquer the Aztecs, and Pizarro would conquer the Inca, thus collapsing 2 of the great civilizations of the Mesoamerican world within 11 years of each other. And what made them so devastating? What made them so good? Was it their intellect? Was it their keen battle strategies? Not really. It was disease. And that was a part of the Columbian Exchange that we had talked about, where we would send our goods from Europe, like horses, pigs, and other crops that weren't native to South America, and they would send their crops over, like potatoes and just sweet, yummy potatoes. That's all I would. I lost track as soon as I said potatoes. But they would also bring disease. They brought smallpox, which was devastating to the populations at the time. We would see anywhere between 80 and 90% of the native populations of the region being killed off by smallpox. So this was a quick 12-minute just info dump. Now, I probably talked really fast. This will be uploaded to YouTube, and you can watch it at a slower speed, so if it makes it easier for you to go back and listen to it again. But this is me kind of going over it uninterrupted, quick, easy, and get this done. So, couple of facts that we need to know. First off, all the assignments are due at their recommended time. So it's at 9 a.m. That's when it's due. It's due the next day. I mean, your life will ease you. For your notes, don't go crazy. There's a 3-page maximum. Don't go nuts. But you will need to summarize, and you will need to paraphrase in order to do it right, because that's the only way you're going to actually take this information in. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this. I try to get this all in one take. No notes, no nothing. The only thing I have with me is this weird, I don't know, sea turtle. And if I'm not mistaken, I have a cat. So let's say goodbye to the cat. Cat, look at the camera. Look at the camera, cat. Say goodbye. Bye-bye.